Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 92 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I got Bill Sutton, just the two of us, Bill, back to the old days. How's it going?
Going well, thanks. How are you?
Good. You know, I always know that as long as I can count on you being here, and not to say anything negative about the other guys, they're awesome to have the extra context. They bring lots of ideas and questions and answers to the podcast when they're here. But I think Ben and John both had things come up today, so they couldn't join us. But I know if you're here, I'm going to have not only theoretical but real world examples of how it works, and allows us to have a really good conversation.
Yep, hope so.
This is going to be an interesting one. And actually, I think maybe this is one where we don't have a lot of real world scenarios yet. It's kind of new. Today, we were talking about actually another podcast, The Click Down, done by Anna Ruiz and Dan Feller and others, where they talk about, well, let me give it a title. The Click Down is the name of the podcast. And this is called the Launchpad series, which we talked about Launchpad last week. Citrix image portability and PVS on public cloud. You and I have brought up PVS a bunch. We go way back when we did it all bare metal.
That's right.
When Citrix acquired the product from whom was it they bought it from? Ardence. Yep. So we go back. We're old school PVS guys. We need to talk about here where it fits in the cloud, public cloud, and why you would do that.
Yep.
So I apologize in advance if we make anybody mad for talking ugly about PVS. Historically, I'm a huge fan of it and loved what it did in the beginning and still love it today. I think my challenges with it historically has been that networking layer that I didn't control. I'll tell you one quick story. I probably had one of the largest implementations of Citrix provisioning services to physical endpoints. We had one lab with 250 devices. We had another lab with 50 devices and another lab with 30 devices. I've got a customer that just retired their labs on PVS within the last month or two during the pandemic because nobody was using it. Huge fan of it. However, the complexity of it, the dependencies on the network, for me, most virtual app and desktop implementations have gone to MCS in a case where I could build out something like Nutanix or some type of hyperconverge. What's your take on old school PVS? And by old school, I mean physical endpoints, which that should be pretty much a moot point, maybe. And your take on using it for VDI and virtual app and desktop workloads today versus, let's say, MCS.
Well, as far as physical workloads, as you recall, the big challenge with that outside of the networking was every device needed to be, in theory, the same or almost the same to support the image. You had to have the same device drivers and all the complexity that went along with having to manage physical devices. Obviously, when we applied the virtualization layer, a lot of that was reduced significantly, if not eliminated. But that networking.
Well, before you move on, let's hit on that real quick because you just pointed that out, right? I mean, if I'm in Azure, right, I assume my tools and drivers I need are going to be all the same. So that's actually a big hurdle that we don't have to overcome anymore, right?
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, when you talk about projects that I had one years ago with an insurance company, PVS for delivering session host servers on VMware. And we set it up. I set it up in like less than 2 days, had everything set up, working. I let it bake overnight, and I came back the next morning and had like 20,000 retries on the vDisk, and the performance was terrible. And they spent weeks trying to figure it out, and turned out they had a loop in their network. Somebody had run a cable literally from one side of the data center to the other side of the data center and created a network loop.
Yep.
And that caused all this retries and retransmissions, and it nearly killed the project. But MCS was obviously more storage based, or is more storage based, and certainly much simpler because it doesn't have that networking component. But the biggest advantage, in my view, of PVS, as you know, is the ability to just really quickly and easily roll back and roll forward, because those images, or those snapshots, versions they call them, are so easy to manipulate.
Yeah. Well, and we've had a lot of experience lately with MCS on top of hyperconverged stuff like Nutanix, and the roll forward and roll back is not instant, but it's still pretty quick. But you point out a couple of things there. The idea that you can roll forward and back's the key, right? When it's like, that didn't work. and we need to roll back, PVS is super quick. I mean, that's just drag and drop reboot, right?
That's exactly right.
And then you have the driver thing that you talked about. You have the networking, which is now done in the cloud. Portability, maybe the portability is not just the roll forward and back, but it's, take it to a different cloud and change the tools out all of a sudden. And then you take something like maybe VMware on top of Azure, on top of AWS, and now I don't even have to change the tools because the hypervisor layer is the same from one to the other. Maybe you're talking me into PVS in the cloud. I thought it was crazy to begin with.
No, I mean, I see the benefit of it. The benefit of it doesn't really change whether you're talking about cloud or on-prem when you're involving virtualization. But I think the biggest driver of this, where we're going to see it used in the cloud, is for those folks that are most familiar with PVS on-prem. Historically, well, let me back up. I don't see it very often in projects. Usually, it's customers that already have it or that are wedded to it. We don't really, very, very rarely, maybe 1 or 2 projects over the 3 years I've been here, I've actually seen a PVS implementation from the ground up. The vast majority of them, or all of them pretty much, are MCS now because it's just simpler, easier. You're talking about smaller workloads in most cases. If you're talking about multi-thousand workloads, I can certainly see where PVS would fit maybe better and easier than the storage requirements for MCS.
Yeah. Hey, let me share my 3, and 2 of them with the same customer, PVS nightmare stories. So maybe it'll help somebody down the road. One, those big labs I was talking about a while ago, when the time came for the students to come back, this was during the summer, we rolled it out, no problem. We had a gig to the lab from the PVS server that was in the data center, which is plenty good enough. But then when the students came back, all of a sudden that gig went down to like 10 megs because it was all carved up. And if it was available, we'd use it. But if it wasn't available, we got limited to our 10 megs or whatever it was to those labs, the big one. That was a nightmare. And then in 2 cases, I had situations where there was an antivirus in play that tried to look at every file every time, even though it had already checked them once. It wanted to look on, and we had 20, 30, 40,000 retries per boot times. In one case, it was a couple hundred machines. In one case, it was a couple thousand machines. There's lots of little nuances that can bite you in PVS that probably bite you in MCS too. It just all happens in the storage layer so fast you don't maybe even notice it being a problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just got to be on you got to mind your P's and Q's when you're doing PVS, and when it all lines up, it is kind of beautiful how it works even today.
It absolutely is.
So in the cloud, so is this Citrix's easy answer for legacy admins so that this one image can go all over the place in the cloud or clouds, even including your own data center? I guess that's really the magical piece here, is to have that legacy technology that is still applicable when you need it.
Yeah, I think lots of customers have been asking for this. The ones that have got larger environments or that are wedded to PVS from years of use, and really want to continue with that ease of management as they see it in the public cloud, and that coupled with their imaging service that they're going to be the image portability service right there on the screen. I don't want to get ahead of us, but I think couple those 2 together will allow you to move those images from one public cloud to on-prem or the other way, or from cloud to cloud eventually.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch the 2 companies, Citrix and VMware, kind of compete for the space. Citrix is in traditional Citrix fashion, trying to make it where it can work on different platforms.
Right.
VMware is trying to, just own all the or be relevant in all the platforms, so that you're running vSphere or ESX in all the different platforms, and portability is kind of native, whereas Citrix is trying to make it where you can pull it out, check it out, and then stick it, somewhere else as needed, and they'll handle the layer that needs to happen to make it work from platform to platform. It's going to be fun to watch this.
It's going to be really fun to watch this, but you're right. With VMware Cloud on AWS and on Azure and the whatever it's called on Google, and then you've got on-prem. So the ability to vMotion or migrate workloads from one place to the other really is not any different than it was in the days where you had it in one data center or another data center. It's really simple. Citrix, I think, like you said, is taking the approach that we want to allow you to not have to have all that infrastructure and pay for all that infrastructure. Just use what you have now, and we can move the images around. If you decide to go from Azure to AWS, or you have presence in both of them, what have you.
Hey, I think a lot of the vendors on the EUC side have realized that managing that compute so that it's not just sitting there running for no reason in the cloud is really near and dear to making these things successful. Not technically successful, but financially successful, which I think has a lot to do with how the cloud use cases will evolve.
Yeah, there's always that concern, obviously, about cost and being able to mitigate that by shutting machines down with the MCS on Azure in particular. I know when that machine shuts down, it literally pulls it out of the environment. So you're not even paying for a storage cost for that VM if you set it up right.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you got 500 VMs and at 7 o'clock at night you only need 100. If in the old days you spun them down, the bits were still sitting on the storage, even though it was not much in the way of storage. In MCS on Azure, the machine's actually gone. The machine object's still there, but the actual storage is discarded. So you're not paying for that storage use.
So you'll probably find this funny. I'm the guy that's almost 50 years old. It's hard to say. Almost 50 years old that still has that reoccurring dream that I forgot to turn in an assignment in college, and I wake up in a night sweat. I have a similar, but not exactly, but a similar idea of being back to being a Citrix administrator in the modern world we're living in today, and not having stuff in place to turn down machines on Friday so that over the weekend we're not paying for consumption. I just had this reoccurring vision of walking in Monday morning going, oh, crud, we just spent an extra $3,000 we didn't have to spend. Obviously there's tools to
yeah. I mean, I have an Azure lab that I use from time to time, and most of the folks on my team have an Azure lab, and I've pretty much told everybody, when you create a VM, set the flag on it that turns it off at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. There, you can actually, set enable a setting on each VM individually. Of course, you can do it via policy as well, but yeah, that's always a big concern, particularly when you're doing a lab environment. If you're building 6 or 8 VMs, if you leave them all running over a weekend, that can add up pretty quick.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a waste of money.
Big time.
So, that's interesting, because I know you were in the office last week and I gave you some servers for the team to use for their on-premises, aka home lab. I think we live in a world where we got to know how it works in both, and we got to know how it works in both at the same time. Now we've got PVS that we can use in both.
Exactly.
I know some of the guys on your team they'll love setting that up in both. And some of them will probably just run MCS and be done with it.
Yeah, probably, but I'm sure there are some that will set it up in both once they're aware, if they're not already aware of the availability, or at least in tech preview of PVS on public cloud.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good point. It is still in tech preview, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Bill, is there anything about PVS in general that we didn't cover here, and specifically PVS in public cloud infrastructure that you want to bring up?
No, nothing that I can think of off the top of my head here.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's pretty much a straightforward thing now that you think about how it works. I guess I do have some concerns, or some wondering about the Pixie boot piece, and are you booting from an ISO, or what are you booting from in order to get those helper addresses so that Pixie actually works?
Yeah, I think the requirement is it does support UEFI boot on Gen 2 machines. Yeah. And I think I remember reading, but I can't find it right now, that you would be using a boot disk, a boot ISO attached to it, as opposed to I don't think Pixie's supported, at least not now. There'll be some form of a boot ISO required, but I might be wrong there.
Well, you just said two things, right? Boot ISO and boot disk, depending on which one of those it is, would be a very interesting, different scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, if people are listening and they want to talk about PVS and want to reach out to us and just jump on a call and kind of talk through the many years we have of trying to understand how it works and what to overcome. I'll tell you, okay. Oh, I got to tell you my favorite PVS story. I don't think I've ever done on this podcast. We were using PVS in that lab and for virtual app and desktop, aka XenDesktop at the time. And the company I was working with at the university, over the weekend, they changed their DHCP system to go from Microsoft DHCP to another third-party DHCP. And one of the flags that the DHCP server would set was release your IP on shutdown. So before the machines would shut down, they would release their IP address, which was not good for PVS. And it would literally be like yanking the hard drive out, right, 20 seconds before the machine would totally shut down. That was a nightmare. Luckily, the guy I was working with knew the environment well enough after 2 weeks to be able to figure out what had happened. And the networking team's like, oh, we didn't change anything. We didn't change anything. We didn't change. That was a funny story, kind of, but very, very common, not necessarily that use case or that scenario, but networking changes make massive impacts on the PVS world.
They definitely will. Like that example I cited, it actually took the customer to get somebody in there with a sniffer to figure out what was going on, and they actually found the cable that literally ran around the floor panels. It wasn't under the floor; it was a raised floor data center, but somebody had interconnected 2 switches, and it just and they were wondering why performance, once the desktop's booted, performance was, it would start off okay, but then it would just get terrible, just really slow and latent. And as soon as they yanked those cables, everything went back to normal.
Yes, slightly similar but different. My first rollout of VMware ESX, I'd done a pilot, worked fine, and then we had to cut over on a Saturday night of the physical file servers to virtual file servers, and I was doing a robo copy, and the pilot was great, got done in like an hour. The actual rollout, POC was great, and then the actual rollout was it took 20 hours for all the data to copy over, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I walked in the next day, and the networking guy, who was not my biggest fan, was with me, and we went to touch the ports where he had plugged it from the patch panel into the switch ports. And one of the 2 ports, when I pushed it, you heard it go click, and it wasn't actually seated. So
wow.
retry over and over and over again. We almost kicked VMware out because it was not working. And the whole thing was that the network guy didn't actually push the RJ45 connector all the way in.
Wow.
Little life lessons.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Well, Bill, anything else going on in your world you want to share while we got some listeners?
No, not really. Just keeping things moving. Any customers need help with services side, configuration, design, implementation, let me know. Give me a call. Send me an email.
Yeah, definitely reach out to us. Your salesperson is XenTegra. Citrix, and tell the Citrix person you want to work with us. And then I guess, we never really do this, but as we grow, we're going to be looking for more people to join us. Feel free to hit myself or Bill up on LinkedIn, and let us know if you're interested someday in working with us. And if you like what we do and our focus on the EUC space, that would be great. Hopefully make it. All right. Well, with that, I'm heading off to HIMSS. I'm going to be working with Citrix at the not HIMSS, but the EDUCAUSE conference.
EDUCAUSE, yep.
So getting back to getting in person, and man, I've missed it. It's also very exhausting, but I certainly missed it.
Yep, it's definitely good to see it starting back up. I really enjoyed those visits we had when you were up here with some customers and some Citrites. It was nice to get back in person. Absolutely right.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, we'll wrap this one up, and we'll do it again next week.
Okay.
Thanks, Bill.